It's hard not to notice that much of the ruling class in Washington resembles a nursing home far more than it does a seat of power for a great country. We have seen so many examples of that, obviously culminating with Joe Biden nominally running the United States while not having a functioning brain. But we've seen it in all sorts of other ways and other people, including and members of Congress who just keep running for re-election and winning re-election into their 70s and 80s and 90s despite being cognitively and increasingly physically incapacitated. Dan Boguslaw is a freelance investigative reporter. He was at The Intercept where he did some of their best work and broke a lot of their stories. He is the author of Deeper State on Substack as well. He's written for many other outlets. And he has a new article in the American Prospect today about this problem of aging members of Congress and specifically once previously secret programs that they have implemented in order to enable them to stay in power even as their brains continue to melt. Daniel, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us tonight.
Hey, Glenn, thanks for having me on. It took a while, but I finally made it.
Here you are. I'm thrilled to have you. All right, let's start with the program that you uncovered and revealed in your article today. I don't think it's been a secret. People have been noticing that there are tons of members of Congress and people filling Washington power positions who are obviously way too old even to function, let alone make decisions of that magnitude. And yet they seem to be recognizing that as well based on the programs they've created for themselves that you've been able to uncover. What is it that you have found?
Sure. Well, I'll start by saying, as you mentioned, we had Nancy Pelosi falling and breaking her hip in Germany last month. We have Jerry Connolly, who's currently leading Democrats' oversight efforts in the House of Representatives, disclosing that he has near terminal esophageal cancer. We have Kay Granger, the Texas rep, who's recently discovered to be living in a senior citizens home with a dementia wing. We had Mitch McConnell having several falls and what appear to be several strokes. The list goes on and on. So I just wanted to ask, what type of treatment are these people getting that's allowing them to even walk and talk at the reduced level that they're doing? And I discovered that there's a very old, almost 100-year-old medical wing housed inside of Capitol Hill. It's called the Office of the Attending Physician. It was started in 1929 after multiple members of Congress had life-threatening falls, in some cases just died on Capitol Hill. And Congress decided they needed to have some kind of doctor, on location to address these types of incidents. But since 1929, this has really grown into a boutique health clinic for members of Congress for around $50 a month. They're able to get primary care, physical therapy. They're able to get referrals to the military hospitals, which are also paid for by tax dollars all across DC. And, I wanted to understand more about how this secretive office functions. Like I said, it's been around for almost 100 years. I couldn't find a lot of information open source on it. So I wrote to every member of the committee that oversees this office. I asked, over a dozen different elected officials, can you tell me who pays in for this program? Can you tell me how much they're paying? And I didn't get a response from a single one.
Yeah, it's amazing how little transparency they're willing to provide. I'm wondering, a lot of people who work end up looking forward to retirement. It's an opportunity to kind of recalibrate your priorities. People like to spend time with their family as they're getting older. There's actually a lot of interesting psychological research where they question people who are in the end stage of their life about what regrets do they have? Like, what do they wish they did more and less of? And almost nobody says, oh, I wish I had worked longer. I wish I had worked harder. Almost everybody says, oh, I wish I'd spent more time with my kids or my grandkids or whatever. People fight to get retirement benefits earlier so that they can retire earlier. And yet these people seem really almost desperate to cling to power, not to give it up, even when they're so infirm. It must be difficult for them even just to get dressed in the morning and wheeled around and have to read these statements. Why do you think that Washington fosters this level of desperation?
Well, I think it's twofold. I think on the one hand, you're completely right. I mean, a lot of these people came up in a different political era. They are, in a sense, addicted to the job. They're used to flying back and forth from their home district in Washington, D.C. They like getting recognized at the cafe. But also, you look at someone like Nancy Pelosi, and she's just structured her entire life around this job. When she's not on Capitol Hill, she's fundraising. It's 24/7. But I want to make clear that the problem with the gerontocracy issue is not an ageism complaint. There are people who can go into their 70s, their 80s, and be coherent. I just saw this evening Bernie Sanders came out and said he was going to stump across America. He was going to go to red districts and try to talk directly to voters who voted for Trump to make his case to the American people in the heartland. Meanwhile, you compare that rhetoric and that tactic with what Democratic leadership has been doing, which is holding rallies, which are laughable even to their moderate centrist base. And you realize that, those Democrats are not invested in the job they were elected to do. They're used to being able to play the Trump is a Nazi card. They're used to being able to basically not have to create any sort of positive platform or program and basically sit back and claim that Republicans are devastating the country and that there's nothing they can do about it. And so I think, obviously age becomes a problem for a lot of these representatives and a lot of these senators. You can see it by the myriad health failures that they have in public when they're trying to do their job. But the point isn't that old people shouldn't serve in government. The point is that the American public can see with their own eyes what is happening, and that special interests, whether they're corporate lobbyists, whether they're foreign lobbyists, have an incentive to maintain the relationships with these politicians, to give their campaign coffers more money. And not only that, but their staffers also have an incentive to keep them in power. I mean, I used to work on Capitol Hill, okay? I would talk to representatives, I would talk to senators, and one of my favorite pranks to pull, which I'd then write up at The Intercept, was to ask a representative or a senator if they supported a position, which it seemed likely they would, and then watch as they would go on the record with me, and then I would watch as their staffers who had been with them for years, who had tried to craft for their own outlook, for their own being the staffers, their own perspective, what they thought the elected official should do. And of course, the comms directors, they tell you, oh, he didn't mean that. Oh, that was taken out of context. But I would always publish the article, before they could make a dent. And it goes to show that the people who are supposed to be doing the job, the people who individual Americans voted for a specific set of platforms, for a specific set of policies, aren't really in control. And how can you be when you're completely out to lunch and you're 85 and you've got a broken hip?
Yeah, look, I take your point. I just watched about how a lot of people who are a very advanced age seem very energetic and very coherent. Bernie is obviously an example. I watched a hearing, I forget whether it was the Tulsi Gabbard hearing or the RFK hearing recently, where Chuck Grassley was running the hearing, or was one of the top Republicans. He's 86, and he's remarkably, cogent and obviously very aware of what he's doing and what he's saying, and not reading from a piece of paper that his staff has written for him. And I know there was an attempt to try and imply that Trump was, disabled by age. He's almost 80, but you look at him, and I think that's clearly not the case. So you are right that just because you are in your late 70s or 80s or whatever doesn't mean that you're necessarily incapacitated or even slowed down. There's a lot of people who are. But nonetheless, I do think there is something about what we might call a gerontocracy, where you still lose something by having a government filled with largely, people in their 70s and 80s. I remember when the internet first emerged and I was working as a lawyer, I was in my mid-20s. I remember there were a lot of older lawyers, partners and the like, who their whole lives had been dictating, letters and documents by speaking into one of those dictaphones and giving it to their secretary, and she would type it up. And then as the internet started evolving, they just refused to learn the computer. They didn't have a computer. They didn't want a computer. They didn't want the internet. And I always remember thinking, wow, that's terrible. That I want to make sure that doesn't happen to me as I get older. I lose sight of, and now when I want to watch something on television, I have to call my kids. Like, the reality is that as you get older, you do get a little bit set in your ways. There are certain things you aren't quite paying as much attention to. It does seem like even if they were physically and mentally sharp, which a lot of them aren't, that you do get kind of ossified as a political system by having a government led by people who are all in their advanced age.
Absolutely, yeah, and I mean, they don't know how to use Twitter, they don't know how to use TikTok, they are not plugged in to the will of not just Zoomers and teenagers, but normal Americans who are using these platforms to communicate and share their sentiments. And the proof in the pudding on that is when you look at the videos that have gone up since Trump's inauguration, where Democrats have a fire under their ass, and all of a sudden they're realizing that they've eaten it on socials and on reaching this writhing, seething base that is now completely enraged by their incompetence. And they try to get their staffers to put up videos. They try to do these things, but it's a total abject failure. And to bring it back to the article, I mean, I think it's the same issue here. It's like I think either party could take a stand and say, it really is obscene that taxpayers to the tune of $4 or $5 million a year are subsidizing our healthcare when we have federal officials, whether it's Trump, whether it's Mitch McConnell, whether it's Elon Musk, saying we're going to scale back Medicare, we're going to scale back Medicaid, we're going to overturn Obamacare. This is an incredible tool. This is an incredible rhetorical point to say, like, yeah, you know what? It is obscene that this system has existed for almost 100 years, where we have the access basically to the best healthcare in the world. And obviously not a single representative wanted to stick their neck out and say, yeah, this is a mistake, this is a problem. So I think just at every level, at every policy decision where there's a fork in the road, at every opportunity to try to bring young people, and not just young people, but anyone who's tapped into the cultural zeitgeist, anyone who's willing to experiment with new forms of communication into the fold, even when there's some flicker of recognition that is something that should be tried, Democrats completely faceplant because they are so resistant to change. They're so resistant to surrendering that power that they've accrued over decades and re-elections. And that's really the problem with the gerontocracy. It's not only an inability to be up to speed. It's not only an ability to function at the highest level, but it's also a bone deep resistance to change.
Well, that exactly. I mean, they get set in their ways. They don't have any ability to understand that the world is different than it was than when they were 40 and developing their views then that haven't changed. Just as the last question, though, I used to struggle a lot on the question of term limits. Because on the one hand, the benefit obviously is that you prevent people from clinging to power the way Dianne Feinstein did, until she's like 90 and not even able to know where she is, and all the other examples that you've identified. On the other hand, it's a deprivation of choice on the part of voters that, if you like your member of Congress, and as you said, people can go into their 70s and 80s and still be incredibly active and energized, why shouldn't you get to vote for them? And I saw, I think it was Matt Stoller the other day said something like, someone said, oh, we should have cognitive tests for our members of Congress. And I think it was Matt Stoller who said something like, yeah, we do. They're called elections. And that's used to be what I thought was, oh, we don't need term limits. Why can't people just vote for who they want for as long as they want? The problem is that we have these re-election rates that make the Politburo, like under Leonid Brezhnev, look vibrant and democratic. These people don't lose elections. And it doesn't matter. No one even know who they are. They just keep winning. What is it about our system that produces that kind of like automatic re-election for all these people who have no business being anywhere near power because of their health?
I mean, look, you want to reference Matt Stoller. Let's take the Stoller answer to the question, which is that when you have mega corporations and mega monopolies that are able to spend whatever they want, however much they want, whenever they want on elections, you create hyper consolidated donor bases that are basically a fortress around anyone moving in. And it's not just corporations, it's also foreign governments. I mean, you look at the 100 mil that AIPAC dropped, they picked their target and they say, you're not going to win re-election. So, I mean, that's a bigger problem. That's a harder problem to solve. It's not as neat and tied in a bow as something like term limits are or cognitive tests. But I think time and time again, log on to opensecrets.com and take a look. Almost every time the biggest spender wins the election. I think, that's the core problem. And the longer you're in office, the more connections you can make, the more favors you can hand out, and the more money you've got in your war chest.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very illusory democracy. All right, well, congratulations on the story, Dan. It's great to finally have you on our show. As you said, we've been talking about it for a while. As you know, I am a admirer of your work. I encourage people to follow you wherever you can be found. We'll put the links under the show notes. And it was great to see you. Thanks for coming on.
All right. Thanks for having me, Glenn.
All right. Have a good evening. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.